Good evening. Thank you to those who dare to listen to us today, and especially to those who dare to do so at night with the lights off. We hope you enjoy the stories we have prepared for this episode, and we hope you keep them in mind the next time you visit a cemetery. Be careful with the interactions you have in one. Prepare your drink and let yourself be carried away. I want to share some anecdotes from my professional practices at the university. I'm sending these to you so that more people can be aware of them. And if someone relates to going through a similar situation, they might find this comforting to read. I've always been very sensitive about these kinds of things, which initially seemed like a blessing, but definitely isn't. It has been a full curse for me. In my university, 2 years of professional internships are required, and due to family and economic reasons, I chose to do these internships at the presidency of my municipality. I started working in April 2017. I was assigned to one of the treasury divisions, where I thought I would just be making copies, as interns sometimes do. But fortunately, it was different. They gave me a desk and a desktop computer. I became just another worker at the town hall, albeit with half the salary, obviously. At the end of June, the then municipal president gathered the workers from my department and said, "I want you to look into the cemeteries in the municipality. Check measures, vaults, owners, payments, everything." There are a total of 4 cemeteries, and as the intern, I was tasked with auditing 2 of them. I've always had a fondness for cemeteries since my youth. I dreamed of meandering among the gravestones, enjoying the tranquility and peace, immersing myself in that land of eternal stillness. To start this task, I armed myself with a notebook and pen, a couple of maps, and a tangible sense of excitement in my heart. The first unusual event happened in the week I commenced this intensive fieldwork in July. While measuring some plots, a storm broke out. I sought refuge in a kiosk within the cemetery, typically used for Day of the Dead masses. I paced in circles trying to maintain body heat, as it was bitterly cold. From a distance, I spotted a 7-year-old boy jumping between the graves. I called out to him, Hey kid, come here, aren't you getting wet?" He looked at me and started hopping towards the kiosk. Stopping at the bottom of the stairs where I stood, he said, "I can't go up, come so you can take me to my mom," and reached out his hand. I noticed it was full of cuts and blisters. Drawing nearer, I realized the boy was missing an eye and barefoot. His feet looked more like claws, explaining his peculiar way of moving. Then, his smile caught my attention. His teeth were like a beak, utterly disproportionate to the size of his mouth. This wasn't a child. I was paralyzed with fear and managed to whisper, "What you are looking for from me, you aren't going to get." He began to laugh while I backed off. And he left just as he had come, jumping over the fence. I decided to wait until the rain stopped. As I was about to leave, I encountered the cemetery watchman and recounted everything I had seen. His response was, "Ah, with you, girl? They had been late in welcoming you." Moving on, other events unfolded, but I'd like to focus on another one that occurred soon after. For this, a brief introduction is necessary. The Day of the Dead in Palma is the All Saints' Day celebration, the most significant event in my city. In September, the municipal president hired a woman responsible for cleaning and removing all the witchcraft works left in the cemeteries because they were thought to project a bad image, and according to superstition, they couldn't just be thrown out with the rubbish. This lady had a monumental task in September and October. However, her contract didn't end at the beginning of November. Instead, her presence in the cemeteries became more frequent, especially in those where I worked, located downtown. What I'm about to tell you happened on January 25th and 26th, 2018. A date I'll never forget, and you'll soon understand why. I was in the cemetery all day, so immersed in my work that I lost track of time. I was inspecting graves rumored to have been tampered with. Masons, the watchman, and the gravedigger had found witchcraft works in them, either inside the mausoleums or buried beside, in front of, or on top of the graves. There were indeed several. Carmen, the lady I mentioned earlier, was with me. On the 26th, as we were about to leave, Carmen was delayed removing a burial, so I continued checking reports to resume the next day. A few meters from me, I could see an old lady all dressed in black, sitting on one of those graves that are excessively adorned with tiles, sculptures, and vases. Curious, I assumed she had recently lost someone very dear to her. That was the reason to stay there at 6 in the evening in the cemetery. So I approached her and told her that they were already closing the gate, that it was late, that if she wanted, I could accompany her to the exit. I made this offer because the lady looked very old, like 90 years old. Her body was extremely thin, and her back already drew a very pronounced curve. The lady turned to look at me. Her eyes were very strange, like those of a blind person, but I knew she was looking at me, even though it was impossible for her to see anything with those white and empty eyes. There was an uncomfortable silence, and with a strange and broken voice, she said, "Yes, accompany me, little girl." I took her by the arm. She felt very cold, like lifeless. I let her lead the way she wanted, as I felt as if I were asleep. When I reacted a little, I realized that we were not heading for the exit, that we were rather going deeper and deeper into the cemetery. Also, the old lady did not walk as an old woman would. We were walking very fast, and it was strange. I felt a lot of fear and wanted to let go, but every time I tried to take my arm away, the old woman held me tighter and tighter, to the point of ending up hurting me. I don't know where Carmen came from, but she saved me. I don't know what would have happened if she hadn't arrived. She stood in front of the old woman, preventing her from continuing to walk, and looked her straight in the eyes. She violently pulled the lady's arm off mine and took me with her, walking backward so as not to lose sight of the old woman. There I began to feel very sleepy, but very strange. Carmen kept telling me again and again, "You cannot fall asleep. Do not fall asleep. You must stay awake, girl. Do not go to sleep." I don't remember at what moment I stopped seeing the figure of the old woman, but I could swear that she got into an open grave. We left the cemetery and Carmen checked my arm. There we realized that the lady had nailed her nails into me, and that among the wounds she had left me like dirt, even a piece of nail. Carmen took some herbs out of her car and water that she made me drink. It tasted quite bitter. It was then that we finally left. We made the way in complete silence. She dropped me off near my house and gave me her address and said, "Come to my house very early tomorrow, before work. I'm going to finish cleaning you." I obviously didn't understand anything, but of course I said yes. I was still quite nervous. At my house, I didn't say anything because I knew they wouldn't believe me. Before 8 at night, I couldn't stand the sleep anymore. I told my mom that I felt a little sick and asked her to please take care of my son that night. I had so many nightmares that I woke up constantly. The worst thing was that every time I woke up, I thought I heard knocks on the windows, and this really isn't possible because my room is on a second floor, and there are no neighboring houses. I also thought I heard footsteps on the stairs and scratches on the ceiling. Although I am sure it was completely real, I still have some hope of having been dreaming. In the morning, before leaving the house, my mom asked me, a little annoyed, who I had been talking to at night. I replied that no one, that I had slept deeply, but she swore to me that voices were heard in my room. I went to Carmen's house and she began to work on my spiritual cleansing. I just watched her pray, burn things, pass herbs over my body. Suddenly I began to vomit. I vomited a blackish mass, and there I could distinguish a ribbon, pins, and a piece of wood. I wanted to cry, but Mrs. Carmen told me that everything would be fine, that nothing would happen, at least not like what had happened the day before. Then she looked at me quite seriously and asked if I had ever tried to commit suicide at some point in my life. I told her no, that I didn't want to answer that I didn't know her enough to trust her with such personal details. She looked at me intently and said, "I know you've tried. You already have a very old work on you and I can't take it off you, but I can tell you where it is and who did it. Because of that work, you won't stop trying until you succeed. Maybe that's why the old lady from the cemetery chose you. Look, take this advice. Never help anyone in a cemetery, nor pay attention if someone says your name. Carmen also said that the most convenient thing would be to check the other cemetery and not return to the same place, at least for a while. And when we got to the next one, she began to guide our walk, as I didn't have the map of the places with reports. There she took me to a space in the cemetery that borders a ravine, took my hand, and said something that still gives me chills today. Here is where they buried you, upside down, and with many pins all over your body. I'm not going to take you out. It's not prudent to do it because the air hitting you could claim your death. I remained skeptical, and even tried to ignore her to end that uncomfortable situation. I interrupted her to tell her that we better get to work so we wouldn't leave so late. We found the graves with reports and she began to take things out of there. At that moment I received a call from the office. They had just called to report some strange candles inside a mausoleum that had been used recently. A poor 25-year-old boy who had been murdered in a very cruel way. I told the lady I wanted to see, and she reminded me of the warning she had given me that same morning. Never help anyone in a cemetery, nor pay attention if they say your name. Here I must pause to tell you that in that cemetery, the graves are so stacked that they are made like small mounds, and there are parts where you do not walk in aisles, rather on the graves. There is a huge tree in the middle of the cemetery, and another at the opposite point to the main entrance. There are 3 entrances, but only all of them are opened on the Day of the Dead. The rest of the year you can only access through the main entrance, and that is also the only exit. I went to look for the mausoleum and started recording to have evidence of the work. I found some black, white, and yellowish souls, which looked quite greasy. In the atmosphere there was a very intense smell of excrement, emanating from a plate that had seeds and what, to me, seemed to be a pig or cow heart. All the time I was sending messages to my ex-boyfriend to try to keep calm, and as he has always shown interest in these kinds of things, I sent him a message to ask if we could make a video call so he could see what I was seeing. The problem is that this message never arrived. I completely lost the phone signal. It had never happened to me while being in cemeteries, but I didn't give it importance, since I live in an area where organized crime has previously restricted communications, destroying the optical fiber, for example. I started walking and took a few photos of sculptures from graves, as they caused me an indescribable fascination. From where I was, I could see the main entrance. As I passed by an open grave, I felt a tug on my foot, and when I turned, I realized that one of my shoelaces had come undone. I bent down to tie it, as I didn't want to fall, and when I stood up again, the entrance had disappeared. I turned on my own axis and everything was headstones and mausoleums. A strong wind began to blow, accompanied by a little rain. I put my feet in motion. I walked uphill, then downhill, to the left, to the right, but everything was graves. I kept moving forward and I was getting more and more nervous. I checked my cell phone every so often in the hope of finally having a signal and being able to communicate with Carmen, with Mom, with my ex, or with anyone. I had an asthma attack caused by anxiety, dust, and bad weather. I couldn't breathe, so I lay down on the ground and closed my eyes, somewhat resigned. In the end, I heard the voice of a child. Later, I learned that he was the son of the gravedigger of that cemetery. He was pulling my arm while shouting to his dad. When I opened my eyes, I had been propped up on a tombstone and they were offering me a Coke. Well, we are Mexicans, and that's how we remedy here when someone's blood pressure drops. It is important to emphasize this point. They had not lifted me up, just propped me up on the nearest tombstone. We were about 3 meters from the entrance. Carmen approached me and said, "Stay here. Rest. I'm almost done. I just need to get what you just found." My cell phone went crazy. Many messages started coming in. My ex told me to be careful, that he had to keep working, but that he would be attentive. My mom had left about 20 messages, asking why I had called her if I didn't answer her. She told me to block the phone. The gravedigger, along with his son, told me they hadn't seen me until I fell. It was as if I had appeared out of nowhere. Carmen finished soon and approached to tell me that that was it for the day. I thanked those people who had worried about me and we left. Carmen gave me a hug while saying, "I will keep you in my prayers." Do not approach cemeteries, please do not do it. We took different directions. I walked towards my grandmother's business, whom I also saw as a mother, and when she and my mom asked me what I was doing there so early, as I didn't want them to worry, I told them that I had gotten sick from my allergy and had ended up in an asthma attack. Both blamed the flowers and the dust and gave me a little of the chicken soup that my grandmother was preparing for lunch. I just enjoyed that little moment of happiness. Although there, I didn't know that it was the last moment of calm for a long time. When night came that day, everything turned into a nightmare. My grandmother's health deteriorated rapidly, and by February 2nd, she was also in the cemetery, there where I had the encounter with the strange old lady who hurt my arm. There I was again, this time not for work, but to bury my grandmother. When I got home after all the pain and with the huge emptiness I felt in my heart, I realized that I had finger marks on my neck. All the time I was in the cemetery, I felt as if I couldn't breathe. At that moment, I thought it was due to allergy, again the flowers and the dust, and I started crying. I don't know if it was because of the pain of having lost my grandmother, who was a second mother, or because of the anguish of knowing that something invisible had tried to hurt me again. Thank you for staying with us. Before we go, we have one more story, but we remind you to subscribe if you haven't already so you can become part of the OneDeepVoid community. And if you use any social media, follow us on our social networks, where you can find us as OneDeepVoid. But well, the break is over. It's time to continue.
Wake up, please wake up.
Hello, everybody. I worked as a watcher at the graveyard in my city for some time. That was really a hard time for me, and there was an urgent need to get some money. So my friend arranged a job for me there since he too was working in the same building and needed one more person to help him out. As the place was very big, so one watchman wasn't enough. It therefore became a necessity to vigilantly guard the place, since sometimes gangs would rush to smoke substances there, therefore doubling the surveillance. Honestly, it was something that would not make me happy. More than that, it made me a little uneasy to have to be there alone at night, but as I already said, necessity made me do it. One sunny afternoon, the funeral of a rich woman took place. I had to be there, along with other cemetery workers, to watch over the place and also to help carry the coffin. I remember it was a very cold afternoon with some rain. The day was quite cloudy, as if these weren't depressing enough to be in that place. But anyway, the funeral was happening, the priest was giving a few words, and my colleague and I were at the sides in our work position, when all of a sudden I saw something walking in the graves behind where the coffin was. At first I thought it was one of the funeral guests because they were all dressed in black, but it didn't make sense for them to leave the burial site. So I went over there to see who it was, as at that time, no one else could enter except for the people at that wake, since the cemetery would close as soon as everyone left. When I approached, I saw something I will never forget. It was like the silhouette of something with wings. I don't know how to explain or describe it to you. It was like an angel with its black wings and completely dressed in black. I only saw it disappear among the graves, leaving no trace in the mud. I returned to my position and wanted the funeral to be over so I could tell my colleague. When we were finally going to bury the coffin, I saw it again, watching the coffin from afar. That thing was floating, and it seemed that I was the only one who could see it. Until a little girl about 2 years old started gesturing to her mom, pointing to where that thing was and wanting to talk to her. Her mom told her to be quiet, but the girl kept telling her to look up. It was obvious the lady saw nothing. The girl continued until the mom had to carry her and leave there, as the baby was getting very restless. I started, along with my colleagues, to lower the coffin into the pit. When we finally finished, that angel, or whatever it was no longer there. After that, the people left and the cemetery was empty. Night fell and I had to go on my rounds, but I was very scared. I had chills every moment and couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. I always knew I was a person sensitive to all those things, as I have experienced several paranormal events throughout my life. But this left me terrified, as I never knew why that black angel had appeared only that day. Maybe the lady they buried wasn't exactly going to heaven, and that thing came for her. It's something I will never forget. but it was undoubtedly a very terrifying experience for me.
Wake up, please wake up.